Hey guys, it's Gary back again. Having a little trouble with my microphone today. Uh, so it's about the fourth time I'm starting this up. Maybe it's because it's a downer video today. It's going to be a short one. Couple updates on a few folks actually. I just found out last night that John Taylor, the jazz pianist, has been around for many years. Passed away 18th of July, 2015. Kind of surprised at that. I'm a big John Taylor fan. Makes me think I shouldn't do videos about artists I like because I have a very bad record of recording videos and artists I like and then they pass away. I can't keep track in the last, especially the last year, but really in the last handful of years, the last few years, how many of the artists that I listen to and love and have for many years have passed away. And I don't know if any of you folks out there are the same as me, but there's many times I find it quite difficult to listen to their music for a while after an artist passes away. Almost makes it preferable to discover an artist after they've passed away, like I did with Wes Montgomery, the jazz guitarist who died in '68, who I discovered around '77 or so, already knowing he had passed away from little miniature biographies that were on the reissued albums of his that I bought. So there's no obvious disappointment. You know you're jumping in after the fact. John Taylor, I think the first Azimuth album may have been the first album of his that I heard. That great, now gone trio with Norma Winstone on vocals, who was John Taylor's wife for a number of years, and Kenny Wheeler on trumpet. Sad thing is, not that long ago, Kenny Wheeler died. So two-thirds of his great Azimuth band that I just did the video on a number of months ago is gone already. So John Taylor, 18th of July, 2015. Kenny Wheeler, his bandmate in Azimuth for the whole history of that group, died 18th of September, 2014. So not that long ago. Less than a year for two of the three musicians in the same band. Very sad, very sad. And in Kenny Wheeler's case, I had heard of him being ill. And when you read about it and they're still alive, you're not sure what that means sometimes. And you're not sure if that means, well, gee, does that mean that kind of at the end, like they're really ill, or, is this something they could overcome? Because I can remember back in the early 80s reading about bassist Dave Holland having a heart attack and recuperating in the hospital. And you didn't know what that meant. You were just reading it. And this obviously before the internet. Well, Dave Holland is still with us. So sometimes you're not sure what this means when you read that someone's ailing. Of course, age has something to do with it when you get into your 60s and upwards. I guess when you read that, the signs aren't all too great. And I mean, we're losing a lot of musicians, and I don't mean to exclude anybody here, especially in the jazz world, but also in the rock world. And I wanted to make mention of somebody else that's completely out of the jazz world that passed away in May. And here's another. Excuse me, because I'm looking for a date while we're here. Completely on, I wouldn't say completely on the other end of the spectrum, but in the 70s, early 80s, before getting into jazz, and for a little while after, I was heavily into progressive rock, and I still follow the groups that I liked, though to be completely honest, I'm more interested in reading about them sometimes than listening to them. About the lineup changes, about who quit the band, about who's not getting along. A lot of times that's more interesting than any new music they put out. And sometimes I'll sample some new music, even sometimes buy an album of some of these old progressive rock bands that I listen to. I'm always disappointed. They're really not living up to the standards that they sent in the early 70s. By the way, I'm playing from the 3 CD box set in the background, whether or not you can hear it. Touchstone, which I think was 78 or 79. I think it was 78 from Azimuth, which was their second album. Strangely enough, this song is called Eulogy, the first track on the album. So I thought that was fitting when having something to play in the background. Whether or not you can hear it, I'm not sure. Getting back to the progressive rock thread, a bit more of an obscure band. There's only a few bands that, a lot of these bands that I listened to in high school era and afterwards, before I really got heavily into jazz. I actually did go out and buy the CDs of these old albums I had. And they're loaded in my computer, which is where I listen to most of the music from. But I gotta admit, I don't listen to them a whole hell of a lot. There's a few bands and musician solo projects as outgrowths those bands that I can still listen to and do on occasion. If anybody's familiar with Focus, the band that had the big hit with Hocus Pocus, which isn't one of my favorites of theirs, but there was a good band of great musicians. I don't know how you pronounce his name, this Van Leer, who's a fantastic classically trained keyboard artist and flautist, who's put out a number of classical flute albums, one of which I just ordered, actually. I can still listen to Focus music sometimes, some of their better things. I can still listen to, on occasion, the early 70s Genesis music before they got poppy in the around 1980. Some of their solo artists, like Anthony Phillips, that came out of Genesis. And another band that I showed. This is what makes me not want to do videos. Not that long ago, I showed this album cover. Little did I know that right about the time I showed it, well, actually possibly a little bit after, is just one of the great album covers, I think, and a pretty good album too. That the keyboard player from Renaissance passed away in May. His name was John Tout. Renaissance is a band with a lot of history. I don't really know if I should go over it, but it was a band that was started by a couple ex-Yardbird guys who kind of lost interest in the group and recorded 2 albums with that group, and one by one everybody left the band. After recording their second album, neither one of their first 2 albums did very well. By the time they got around to recording the third album, the personnel had changed so much, there were no original members left. And yet, oddly enough, this second incarnation, which this is their first album together called Prologue, became the one that became the well-known version of the band. And they continued for about 72 to 79 or 80 without really a personnel change. And the band was... it's an interesting band. It was a 5-piece band with fantastic vocalist Annie Haslam that was very much in the classical rock groove. And their guitarist, who initially was like a Brian Wilson figure, the management plan was that he would write the music for the band but not perform with them. That pretty much changed. They would just hire a guitarist, which they used on their first album, even though this other guitarist, Michael Dunford was his name, was writing all of the material for the band except for the lyrics. So Michael Dunford was writing the music. He was a guitarist, but he wasn't playing guitar in the band. And the lyrics, which Michael didn't write, were actually written by a poet named Betty Thatcher, who was also not a member of the band. She was a British poet. And so Michael Dunford was writing the music, and the reason I bring him up, a couple of reasons, is he's easily in my top, within rock writers, composers, he's easily in my top 3. And originally, like I said, he was kind of a Brian Wilson figure. The management figured that he would sit home, write the material, band would record the albums and go out and play. So they did that in this album. They had a guitarist that was with the band a number of months. And eventually, by the time their second album came around, Mike Dunford, the composer, had actually become the guitarist in the band and stayed there throughout the 70s. And the lineup was solidified around Annie Haslam, the vocalist. They had a bass player, a drummer, Terry Sullivan, and a really, really wonderful, classically influenced keyboard player named John Tout. Now, I just found out that on May 1st, John Tout passed away. The interesting thing with Renaissance, unlike really most other progressive rock bands, is once Mike Dunford, the guitarist, joined the band, he pretty much through pretty much all of the band's classic albums until the last couple, never touched an electric guitar. He eventually did on two of the albums, but all of the band's early material, Mike Dunford stayed with acoustic and nylon string guitars. Very interesting in a progressive rock band. So he wasn't really playing lead guitar so much. There were no guitar leads. So the instrument that really became the upfront main instrument in the group was the piano, by John Tout, fantastic player. Unfortunately, John Tout did not really play much synthesizers. He did play a little bit of synthesizers, more using it for color. But he was primarily a pianist, which is pretty much unlike most of the progressive rock bands. Even a keyboard-led band like Emerson, Lake and Palmer was primarily organ and synthesizer and electric keyboards. With Renaissance, more so than any progressive rock band I can think of, the acoustic piano was really the lead instrument. They also used a lot of orchestra strings specifically, on their classic albums from the 70s. And John Tout would play a little bit of synthesizer, but not very much. Didn't play very much. Piano was really the primary instrument. And in all of these 1970s classic records, for the most part, the piano was basically the lead up-front instrument. John Camp was a fantastic electric bass player. That was pretty much up front, too, very much in the Chris Squire mode. But the piano was really the upfront instrument. The primary instrumental color came from that because the composer, Michael Dunford, was writing music but playing pretty much acoustic and nylon string guitars, which really gave the band a nice color. The whole basic band, the only electric instrument was really the bass guitar and the little bit of electric keyboards that John Tout would add into the music. So it's a very unique sound. The classical and acoustic guitars kind of strumming away there gave the band a nice, unique color. Far less electric than a lot of the bands. A little bit later on, around 78 or so, Mike Dunford did start playing a little bit of classic electric guitar in with the music, which actually sounded good because it added another color. But it was never a screaming lead guitar thing for the most part. So I was very saddened to hear about John Tout dying. And he left Renaissance in about 1980. And he really, you really didn't hear much from him. He did a couple guest shots. Renaissance continued with their drummers and their keyboard players constantly changing after that. They split up. They would get together again with different drummers and keyboard players and even bass players. And there was one reunion album that they did that John Tout played a little bit of keyboards on. It was around 2000, 2001, but he wasn't the only primary keyboard player on the project. And the drummer Terry Sullivan came out with a solo album finally around 2000 something, and I think John Tout came and played a little bit of keyboards on there, but again wasn't the primary keyboardist on there if I'm recalling correctly. So there wasn't a whole lot of John Tout material after 1980, which is a shame because he's very, very technically proficient. And the whole band, essentially, the five musicians that were in the band, with the sixth being Betty Thatcher, who was the lyricist for the band. Three of those people have passed away now. The lyricist Betty Thatcher died in 2011, in August of 2011. Unfortunately, Michael Dunford, who I just love the man's composing, loved his concept of having the acoustic guitar in the band, died from cerebral hemorrhage in England just before the band was touring as Renaissance with the original vocalist, with Annie Hasselman vocals and Michael Dunford. The other musicians of the classic lineup weren't there. So he passed away in November 2012 from cerebral hemorrhage, so that wasn't that long ago. And now John Tout, the keyboard player, died 2015. So if you're counting the lyricist as being one of the band members, the primary classic lineup being 6 members, half of them have now passed away all in the last few years. That's a real downer. Really great band. I was always hoping that someday, at least in the studio, they would do another project together with the full 5 musicians, of the classic lineup. So sad to see that. Sad to see that. Did I show I think I showed. I think I showed some of these CDs. They didn't call it Azimuth in name, but Kenny Wheeler, Norma Winstone, John Taylor, and the Maritime Jazz Orchestra, which is essentially Azimuth with an orchestra, did a couple of fairly obscure CDs. I wanted to show them, but you know what? Now that I think I showed this. They did 2 of these. So it's basically Azimuth, not in name and not on the ECM label. Kenny Wheeler's recorded on his own, the trumpet flugelhorn player of Azimuth. This is from the 70s, 78, classic album of his. Another ECM classic album that came much later. This is from the 90s? I think it's from the 90s, 97. And here's a fairly obscure one on Soul Note, which I think is an Italian label. And I don't see a date on here. I want to say, 97. Same year as the last one. This is a pretty album with a great album cover. This is a good one to get if you can find it. Soul Note. Kenny Wheeler, John Taylor. Again, John Taylor on piano. It's 2/3 of Azimuth on here. I didn't even realize that when I pulled this out. I just went to grab a couple of these. Furio De Castri on bass and Joe LaBarbera on drums. So it's basically a jazz quartet. But I didn't even realize when I pulled this to show that it was John Taylor on piano on this, so it's very fitting. Very fitting. Wow. So just so this whole kind of update video is, it's already 17 minutes and I thought it would be about 5. Just so the whole thing isn't a big downer, totally unrelated to all these musicians dying, and God knows I'm leaving out so many classic musicians that have, especially jazz musicians that have passed away in recent months. Just to keep you updated on what I've been doing or what I haven't been doing. Remember how I said I buy albums because I dig the covers? Guilty as charged. I found this fantastic on the Naxos label, Naxos. I should learn how to pronounce them because I have probably 100 CDs by them. Primarily because I'm such a sucker for cool album covers. I found these. They have this series called Night Music. That's all you got to say to me, and I'm looking into it already. And what they are is pretty standard compilations of classical music. They have the same shortcomings that most compilations of classical music have that aren't associated with one particular artist. Why did I buy them? Well, anyway, this Night Music is at least up to 20 volumes. I bought 5 of them recently. Interestingly enough, they came with these little. I don't call it an Obi strip because it's a whole back panel. Look at the covers. I bought volumes 6 through 10 because at least the first 2 or 3 batches of 5, volumes 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15, were apparently packaged together in groups of 5, or you could buy them all individually. And I thought they would come with a box set, but I ordered it from a seller, not directly from Amazon. And the way they kind of pushed them into an envelope makes me think that there may have been a little cardboard box involved, but they didn't want to ship the cardboard box possibly because it would make the envelope much bigger, so it looks like they pulled out the individual CDs. I could be wrong, but I don't know why you would package 5 together and not put a little paper slipcase at least. But when I saw the covers, at volumes 1 through 5, the covers are as beautiful as well. But they're budget, they're budget compilations. But when I saw the covers, and I can't remember what I paid for these, but let's say it was, I think it was maybe $20 for all 5, including shipping. a lot of pieces that you don't even realize you know. But the covers are beautiful, and it's good music. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I have been listening to specifically a lot of classical music lately, trying to get like arranging ideas for some of the music that I've been writing, which is going slower and slower as we speak. Sometimes you just get so involved in it and you just burn out. I can recall, I don't know, 4 or 5 days I had maybe 20 seconds of music done. And it was just like, and I knew what I had to do, and it was just so much work, and I got lazy. But anyway, with this whole idea of using computer software, virtual instruments, where I can get orchestra sounds, so I'm not limited to what I can play. I wanted to start listening to classical music to get ideas, not for riffs, like I said before, because I'm not good enough to rip them off, but rather to hear orchestral colors and how I could incorporate, what's good. Oh, flute sounds good with strings, brass, whatever, like ideas like that. Here's the last one, volume 10. These are all, I mean, they're all worthwhile, but they have the same shortcomings that most compilations do. The Nexus is an incredible label anyway. The sound is incredible on these CDs. Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Vivaldi, Mozart. There's nothing obscure here, really. Bach, Handel, Rimsky-Korsakov, Debussy. The problem is, every once in a while you'll get a longer piece, like 8 minutes, but there's a lot of things on here which are excerpts from longer pieces. And, these longer pieces that they're excerpting might be 20 or 30 minutes long, and they're taking out a 2-minute section, which just happens to be the main theme that everyone would know that was used in movies or whatever, and not the whole piece, actually. That's a shortcoming of most compilation CDs in classical music, which is why I really think it's better, in general, to go and buy one, a single disc by a Debussy or something like that, and you get the full pieces, and you can hear the development of a piece and not a little 2-minute chunk of the best-known section. But I think it was about $20 I paid for these 5, all in those funky slipcases. I don't know what they call them, because I've only seen these once or twice. They're like Obi strips, but they've got the whole backing thing in Japanese on them. And I wasn't even aware that it was an import version I was buying. I thought this was the domestic version, but this is what the seller had. Weird. Would I like to get the whole collection? Yeah, because the covers are great. And it's not that the music's bad, but I don't know if besides the covers, I would recommend it over any other compilation of classical music that's, fairly decent. I mean, each CD runs over 70 minutes, so you get your dollar's worth. I have seen classical compilations that are, budget especially, and you look at the running time, and the running time's like a measly 45 minutes or something. You fit 80 minutes on a CD, so it's in the end, it's probably not worth it. So that's what else have I got going on? I can't think of much interesting, to be honest with you. Okay, guys, I'm gonna do, I have a couple ideas for videos, but doing these artist overviews kind of gets exhausting in a way, because I do a lot of preparation, I take a lot of notes, and even with the notes I take, I realize when I am finished recording the video that I've left out a bunch of facts. Then immediately afterwards, I discover more about the artists that I should have included in the video. Because generally what happens is, I do everything ass backwards sometimes, is I'll record these videos showing some of the stuff like I've shown here. And afterwards, it makes me really start listening again to the specific things that I showed in more depth than I've been listening to them presently. And it's like, I should have said this, I should have said that, I should have showed this, I should have showed that. So, it's kind of a learning process, like a lot of people might watch my videos, and in some cases want to try to get into the artists, and maybe they go find something after the fact, after I've done the video, and oddly enough, I'm probably also listening to that same music, because I did the video, and it's like, well, let me give this another listen again. So it's not necessarily a case of as soon as I'm done recording this, I'm on to the next thing. most of the time I actually stick with a lot of the music that I just showed. I'd probably give it another spin. I've got John Taylor playing now. It's going to be a little hard, having just found out about him in passing yesterday. Okay, guys, this went on a hell of a lot longer than I anticipated, but I haven't done real video for a while, I guess. I hope everybody's doing well, and I will be back soon, and I hope to see all you soon on your own videos. Take care.